A searing wind tore across dry. Mesa Hold as Elias Kane urged his mare up the rocky wash. The animal's flanks slick with sweat beneath a merciless sun. Every hoofbeat kicked up crimson dust that clung to his boots, and the creak of leather reins was the only sound against the lonesome stretch of rust-hued earth. Elias paused at a jutting outcrop of mesquite, shaded by scrub brush, and scanned the horizon. No sign of the stray steer he'd tracked since dawn. Only heat waves shimmering above cracked soil. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches your heart, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've got something extra special saved just for you. His jaw clenched when he spotted fresh hoof prints veering toward a lone mesquite tree. Prints too small for his own herd and set in delicate formation. The mare stamped once, impatient, and Elias dismounted, pressing his hand against the rough bark to steady himself. He crouched low, tracing the hoof prints where the dusty ground gave way to soft loam beneath the tree's scant canopy. The wind tugged at his hat, and he wrapped a leather-gloved hand tighter around the brim before standing. Then he saw her, a slender figure slumped against a tree trunk, wrists bound by coarse rope that bit into pale skin. A faded canvas sign dangled from her neck, edges fraying in the breeze. Elias approached quietly, heart pounding like a war drum. The girl's dark hair lay tangled across her shoulders. Dust and sweat streaked her cheeks. Her head lolled forward, and the hem of her tunic was torn and stained with dirt and blood. He reached her in a few strides, the mare's soft whinny echoing behind him. Elias knelt and slid a hand beneath her chin, lifting her face into thin shade. Her eyes, almond-shaped and haunted, fluttered open, pupils clouded with fear. He swallowed hard as her gaze met his, defiance warring with vulnerability. The sign scrawled words read, "White man don't forgive." Beneath the blunt message, a smaller script, Aguija, hinted at her Apache name. Elias's chest constricted at the realization. Here lay a child of the land he'd called home, punished and abandoned. A thread of guilt unraveled in his mind. He'd heard tales of vengeful cowboys and cavalry raids, but never this close. He drew his Bowie knife, its blade darkened by years of use, and knelt beside the girl. "Easy now," he murmured, voice rough with wonder and alarm. He sliced the rope at her wrists, the coarse fibers snapping free like brittle bones releasing. The girl's arms dropped to her sides, trembling. Elias worked the knot at her ankles, the wind swirling through his hair as if urging haste. Once her bindings loosened, she crumpled, and Elias caught her before she hit the ground. He laid her across the mare's broad back, head nestled between his arm and the saddle horn. The mare shifted under them, lips brushing the mesquite's thorny branches. Elias lifted her with a grunt, settling her carefully behind his seat, then swung up himself. The girl's ragged breath came in shallow gulps. Elias tightened the saddle cinch and patted the mare's neck. "Hold steady," he whispered, voice catching. He guided the mare away from the mesquite, toward the corrals and cabins of dry Mesa Hold, his mind whirling with questions he dared not voice. By the time he reached his homestead, low stone walls and weathered wood, far from any town, the girl's eyes had fluttered shut. He dismounted and led the mare into the small corral, using the gates for leverage. Samuel Dunn, the ranch's longtime cook and stable hand, burst from the bunkhouse, spatula in hand and worry etched across his sunburned face. "Elias!" Samuel called, setting the spatula aside. "What in heaven's name?" Elias held up a finger, steeling himself. "Tala," he said, pressing the girl gently to his chest. Apache girl, tied to that mesquite, no sign of her captors, wanted to make sure she lived. He half lifted her, and Samuel reached for a woolen blanket, wrapping her in its scratchy warmth. Tala's eyes opened, dark orbs reflecting the lantern's glow. She blinked, confusion and panic mingling in her gaze. Elias knelt beside her, careful not to startle. "You're safe here," he said quietly. "Name's Elias Kane. This," he gestured at the outpost encircled by low stone walls, "is dry Mesa Hold. We don't hang children." Her lips parted, a single word slipping out in soft Apache tongue. Elias shook his head. He knelt and lifted her hand, placing it across his heart. "I'm listening," he said. The warmth of the blanket seeped into her frail frame, and she closed her eyes again, breathing easier in the promise of shelter. Samuel rushed to the nearest cabin door. "I'll fetch the doc satchel, bandages, whiskey. Better yet, that salve Mrs. Kane left behind." He darted off, leaving Elias to steady himself against the girl's weight. As he settled Tala on a cot in the bunkhouse, Elias studied her bound wrists, raw, reddened wrists that told a story of cruelty. He pressed fresh cloth to the cuts, the sting pulling a soft whimper from her lips. He wiped tears from her cheeks, his own heart ached raw with empathy. Outside, the wind lashed the outpost eaves like invisible scourges. Elias closed the lodge door against the blast, bolts rattling in their sockets. In the sudden hush, broken only by the girl's labored breaths, he realized their isolation cut both ways. Saved from the desert's brutality, but still vulnerable to men's cruelty. A creak in the distance froze him, leather strapping underfoot. He rose and peered through the narrow window slats. Across the dusty yard, a lone rider squared in silhouette against the setting sun, head turning as though tracking his path. The figure watched the outpost with deliberate stillness, rein slack in one hand, rifle cradled in the other. The rider's dust-scarred coat hinted at authority. Cavalry or posse. Elias's jaw tightened. He moved to Tala's cot and laid a protective hand on her shoulder. "They'll not find you here," he whispered. "Rest now." The lantern's glow flickered with hope and impending threat, painting flickering maps on stained walls. Outside, the rider spurred his mount, boots landing in the yard's pale dust. The world narrowed to the door's threshold, Tala's faint pulse against his palm and the rider's approach. Elias braced himself for what came next, determined to stand between the bound child and the unforgiving world she'd barely survived. In that moment, as Shade's cry echoed from the corral and the rider paused under dry Mesa's silent ridge, Elias Kane realized rescue was only the beginning. Survival would demand every ounce of courage, compassion, and resolve he possessed. A low groan stirred the bunkhouse as dawn broke, the single lantern guttering its last breath before surrendering to pale light. Elias Kane shifted beside the cot, the raw stink of sweat and pine resin clinging to his clothes. He rose on stiff legs and padded to the cot's edge, where Tala lay wrapped in a wool blanket. Her breathing was ragged, eyelids heavy with fever and fear. Elias dipped a cloth in cool water drawn from the well and pressed it to her forehead. Each droplet hissed against her skin like a whispered promise of care. Outside, the wind whispered through roof boards, stirring the dust that danced in the beams of morning. Elias knelt, unwrapped her arms, and winced at the deep gashes where a rough rope had bitten centuries of cruelty into her flesh. He coated each wound carefully with salve from Samuel Dunn's leather satchel, an acrid, healing smoke scent that tasted of desert herbs. Tate's sand and cactus bloom mixed in the ointment, and with each gentle stroke, he imagined wiping away more than blood. Tala's dark lashes fluttered, then stilled. Elias laid the cloth aside and sat on the bunk's edge, head bent. He did not speak. Silence held him in fragile company. Only when the last salve was applied did Tala lift a trembling hand and reach for something hidden beneath her shawl. She drew out a smooth, oblong stone, river-worn and speckled like a starless night sky. Her fingers curled around it protectively, and she pressed it into Elias's palm. "This," she whispered in Apache words, voice thin as cracked earth. He caught only the small syllable, then her eyes closed again. Elias traced the stone's cool surface. Small pockmarks, spiral veins carved by water's relentless flow. He recognized its power as instantly as the song of wind through canyon walls. "You signal me," he murmured, "with your rock." He recalled her moment beneath the mesquite tree, her arm raised for salvation, and her courage shining amid terror. He pressed the stone to his heart, as though pledging to guard both her and her signal in this uncertain land. He rose, gathering fresh blankets in a tin cup, his thoughts drifting to darker days. "My brother," he said quietly, almost to himself. He fell in the Chiricahua raid. Took in too many Apache scouts. Thought he could stand alone. The canyon swallowed him. He paused at the loft ladder, breath catching. "I carry guilt heavier than these wagons." His voice broke like bone against bone, but he held himself upright. Betrayal and loss had shaped him. Now rescue and redemption anchored him. Tala stirred, lips parting in a hushed plea. Elias knelt once more, offering the cup, water scented with a pinch of barley Samuel had soaked overnight. He coached each swallow as though coaxing a sapling to take root. In her wan smile, he saw both gratitude and resolve flicker like embers. He brushed stray hair from her brow, then tucked the stone into his vest pocket, its weight a reminder of her story and his vow. Samuel burst through the bunkhouse door, boots caked with creek mud, and set a tray of coffee on the workbench. "Tracks round the corral," he warned, voice low. "Posse scouts past 2 hours gone. They'll circle back once the sun's high." Elias nodded, eyes sliding to Tala, whose chest rose slower than morning's first breeze. "Let them come," Lila murmured. "No, Tala," he thought, her voice firm despite her weakness. "We hide what needs hiding." They carried Tala gently to Samuel's adobe kitchen, lifting her onto a cot beneath a cool shadow. The kitchen's hearth crackled, its warmth seeping through stone walls. Elias brewed tea from desert willow bark and cloudberry leaves, the stew of steam comforting in its promise of health. Tala sipped with intent, each gulp warping her fevered flush toward health. Beyond the kitchen's split-plank door, hoofbeats rang again, deliberate and purpose-driven. Elias set the tin cup down, gloved hands sliding beneath his duster for the grip of his coat. He stepped outside, Samuel at his shoulder, eyes scanning the corrals where hoofprints dug shallow trenches in red dust. 2 sets, one broad, one slender, marked a reconnaissance circle. The posse knew someone sheltered here. Elias returned quietly and met Tala's gaze. Her strength shone in that locked look. He pointed to a low loft in the barn. "Hide there," he instructed. "Samuel and I will hold them off." He draped a wool blanket over her and guided her to the rafters where the stones signal-carved tight spaces of safety. "Stay quiet," he whispered. She pressed a stone to her heart and nodded once, fierce as desert sun. As Samuel retreated into shadows with his rifle cocked, Elias knelt by the door and propped it shut with fresh planks. The barn's heavy boards creaked under tentative blows. Horse hooves drummed a demand against the walls. Outside, voices rose in curt commands. Elias's throat tightened, but his hand was steady on the Colt's butt. The desert wind carried each word. "Open up, Cain. We know she's here. Release the savage or face the law." In the hush before the wooden slats gave way, Elias unrolled a fresh sheet of parchment and dipped his quill in ink. His fingers flew across the page, each stroke a tether between rage and reason. He sealed the note with wax pressed by the river stone's rough edge and strode to the door, hammer in hand. Raising a single plank, he hammered the note in place. "Posse of Sagebrush Junction, find the truth in kindness. Release your hate at my door. Justice is stronger than fear." He retreated, relocking the plank, and gestured to Samuel. The barn's dank air swallowed their breath as hoofbeats faltered, voices exchanged. The note fluttered in the breeze, a fragile thread thrown against a storm of vengeance. In the sudden twilight hush, Tala's small form loomed above them. Her dark eyes steady despite her hidden weight. Elias met her gaze, his own resolve mirrored in her silent strength. Beyond the barn, the ridge's silhouette held the promise of judgment. And as the posse's figures paused to read the hastily penned words, the air brimmed with the tension of rebuke and the quiet hope that salvation may yet come from these desert walls. The final moment, before the posse roused to action, hung between blood and mercy, tethered by a simple plea and a river-worn stone's weight. In that fragile breath, Elias, Cain, and Tala Vance prepared to face what would come next. A sharp rap shook the barn door as dusk fell, each knock resonating like a judge's gavel. in the empty stall. Elias Kane's hand tightened on the coat tucked beneath his duster, heart pounding in time with the wind's lament outside. He rose from his stool, dew from the evening chill clinging to his boots, and motioned Samuel Dunn to stand ready by the hay bales. In the loft above, Tala Vance pressed herself against the rafters, the river stone warm against her palm, a silent witness to what was coming. Elias slid open the door. 5 riders in wide-brimmed hats and dust-grimed chaps filled the porch's slanting lantern light. Their leader, Sheriff Barrett Locke, dismounted with measured grace, spurs jingling like broken promises. "Kane," he called, voice taut, "you harbor an Apache outlaw. Deliver her, or we claim her and your land both." His second, Posse Deputy Mark Ellis, cocked a shotgun, the barrel glinting in the half-light. Samuel stepped forward, shotgun leveled at knee height. "She's no outlaw," he growled, voice steady. But the posse's faces remained hard as desert stone. Mrs. Danforth, the third elder, tapped her riding crop against the doorframe. "Your claim ends when you shield her," she said. "Land's law is carved by white men's hands." Inside, Tala felt the barn's floorboards tremble with tension. She slid the river stone into her pocket and gripped the wooden beam. Her mind echoed with memories of that night. Embers on a dry brush, war cries floating across the canyon, and the crack of bone as her family fell. The raid had been swift and cruel, leaving her as a sole survivor, bound and marked for vengeance. Now, fear and resolve braided together. She would not return to the same fate. Elias squared his shoulders beneath the lantern's wavering glow. "Tala isn't your prize," he said, voice low but unwavering. "She's a child of this land. You threaten me. You threaten the hold I call home." He gestured inside, toward the shadowed stalls. "She's hidden where no rope or gun can reach." Locke's gaze flickered to the barn's rafters. "We've tracked her tracks through Red Creek and Black Spring. Blue Ridge, too. We follow her here." He spat the words like venom. Land disputes or not, rebels pay their price. He signaled his men forward. "Search the barn." Samuel slammed the trap door shut above, plank meeting plank with a final thud that echoed to the rafters. Tala pressed herself deeper into the darkness, knees tucked, breath held. Below, Elias stepped forward. He slammed the door shut on the sheriff's booted toes before turning the heavy latch. The echoes of locking would rang like a verdict. From above, Tala whispered a name in Apache, Nantan, and traced the river stone's familiar curves. She remembered her mother's lullabies beneath moonlit skies, the softness of deer hide against her cheek, and the promise that blood ties ran deeper than hatred. Her courage fused with Elias's stand. Together, they would break the threads of vengeance. Below, the posse pounded on the barn door. "Open up," Ellis shouted. "One more minute, and we burn it down." The embers of Samuel's gunfire threat still hung in the air. Elias exchanged a steely glance with Samuel. "We run," he said, voice firm. "Now." He pulled Tala's shawl from his saddlebag and tossed up the pitch, a woven decoy fluttering into view. The posse's eyes followed the false figure perched in the loft. Elias bolted from the barn into the night, Samuel at his heels, shotgun slung over one shoulder. Tala dropped from the rafters, landing silently on bent knees. She picked the river stone from her pocket, its weight a steady anchor. They slipped off the porch into the corral's pen, where a scattered herd lowed in confusion. Behind them, the posse burst through the barn door. Flames licked the dry wood as a shot rang out, Samuel's warning bullet spitting sparks from the door's rim. "Get out," he hissed, rifle steady. The posse halted, reluctant to advance into potential ambush. Elias led Tala past group horses, their manes brushed with gold dusklight. He vaulted into the saddle of his roan mare, dried dust, and offered Tala the pommel. She climbed into the saddle behind him, shawl coiling at her knees, the river stone pressed in her fist. Samuel mounted a second horse, gun trained on the posse's pale faces. "Reckon we'll make for Painted Gorge," Elias murmured. Moses' Gorge, the old Apache's refuge. She knew its whispered trails. Tala nodded, her hair catching the fading light like black rivers. She returned a silent oath. She would guide him to safety, and he would guard her life. They spurred into the night, hoofbeats drumming a desperate rhythm against the canyon walls. Behind them, the posse fired a single warning blast, the explosion echoing off the cliffs like a final shriek. The riders wheeled, hunted by the desert shadows, and Samuel kicked his horse into a gallop to block pursuit. Tala leaned into Elias's back, breath steady despite the panic twisting inside her. She pressed the river stone to her lips, a seal on the pact forged that night. They would run as one, flee blood's demands, and find refuge under sky that knew both sorrow and mercy. Ahead, the gorge yawned, narrow, treacherous, and promising concealment. The horses plunged in, hoofs dusty and sure. In that breathless passage beneath jagged walls, Elias and Tala fled not only foes, but the debts of grief, seeking the wild sanctuary where wounds might find healing beyond reach of hate. And as the canyon swallowed their silhouettes, the gunshots' echo faded into silence, replaced by the lullaby of plains under starlight, a fragile thread of hope guiding them toward dawn's first promise. A jagged wind sliced through painted gorge as night deepened, rattling loose stones down narrow walls and stirring whispers of ancient bones beneath moonlit cracks. Elias Kane presses back against a granite swell, Colt drawn but lowered, breath ragged with heat and fear. Dust drifted like phantom embers along the pass's floor, and every echo threatened to betray them. Tala Van stood beside him, shawl cinched tight, eyes fixed on shadowed passage ahead. Her hand brushed the river stone at her throat, the smooth weight a steady anchor to the ground. Behind them, Samuel Dunn's rifle lay ready. No one spoke, each flake of silence a prayer for survival. They crept deeper into gorge, where walls curved like the inside of a skull, and starlight filtered through jagged teeth. Tala's bare feet, softened by youth, slipped across the crumbling sands. Elias followed, each step measured against the canyon's hush. "Water's close," she whispered in Apache, voice carried on her breath. He nodded, sweat stinging his eyes, and trusted her lead. She ducked beneath a ledge and knelt before a shallow pool fed by seepage, a lifeline in the stark cradle of stone. Elias watched as she cupped the water, letting it trickle through her fingers before offering him a sip. Cool relief curled through him. He pressed the river stone into her open palm in thanks, the pact between them strengthened by shared thirst. Ahead, the gorge narrowed, a slot carved by centuries of wind and flood. Tala pressed herself through the gap, back to Elias. He followed, shoulder-scraping sandstone, until they emerged in a small bowl ringed by towering spires. Moonlight pooled here, silvering twisted rock. He paused to catch his breath and glanced at Tala, whose dark braid swept over one shoulder in relief. She met his gaze, lips curling into a pale smile. In that quiet exchange, Elias saw not a frightened child, but a warrior born of these lands. Their respite shattered with a distant twig snap, a single sound that scattered hope like dust. Samuel stepped from the shadows, rifle leveled at the narrow entrance. "Scout," he whispered, voice taut. "He's tracking us." Elias's hand trembled against his revolver as the pass's mouth darkened with movement. One rider, lean and pale beneath his dust-streaked hat, emerged in silhouette. The scout halted at the bowl's lip, eyes narrowing as he surveyed the hidden refuge. Elias clenched his knife, heart thudding like a drum. Before they could slip deeper, a sharp crack split the air, a pistol report echoing off stone. A bullet whined past Elias's ear and thudded into the rock above, spraying sparks. He stumbled, wiping sweat from his brow, as pain bloomed in his left shoulder. Blood seeped through his shirt. Tala sprang forward, shawl whipping behind her, and knelt beside him. "You're hit," she said in soft English, eyes bright with fear and resolve. She tore a strip of her shawl free, wrapping it tight around his wound. The cloth, rough and stained, bound flesh and pledged together. Elias winced, but held his ground. Tala drew the river stone from her pocket and pressed its cool surface to his bleeding skin. "Thread of our promise," she murmured in Apache. Blood blossomed beneath the stone's curve, mingling her oath with his pain. He closed his eyes, the ritual's quiet strength pulsing through him. Samuel cradled Elias's arm, fetching water from a saddlebag canteen to wash the wound. "We run now," Elias said, voice hoarse. He rose unsteadily, bracing against a boulder. Tala helped him place weight on wounded side, her hand warm against his back. They moved as one, wounded father, fierce guide, steadfast ally, toward a hidden slot in the canyon's eastern wall that Tala had spotted in the moonlight. Behind them, the scout called out, voice distant but urgent. Footsteps crunched on sand. The posse, alerted by the scout signal, would follow soon. But the gorge's secret trail curled upward, narrow and treacherous. Samuel led, torch-lit, masking their passage in wavering light. The canyon walls constricted, and the air cooled with the desert's secret breath. Ahead lay the hidden recess where Tala's people once found refuge. As they climbed, Elias leaned on Tala's shoulder, each labored step a testament to trust built in desperation. The river stone tucked his vest throbbed against his ribs, an unbreakable bond hammered in blood and stone. He recalled his brother's last breath under raid's flames and vowed to shield this girl, whose courage mirrored his lost kin's valor. At the slot's crest, they paused in a narrow alcove, pink granite glowing like embers in the torch's flicker. Below, the canyon floor stretched like a pale map of peril. Above, the night sky sprawled, endless and indifferent. Elias pressed his palm to Tala's, where the river stone lay against her skin. "We got farther than I dreamed," he said, voice steady despite the tremor in his throat. Tala's gaze drifted to the open sky, then back to him. She extended her hand, finger brushing his blood-stained sleeve. "We go together," she said softly. The canyon's hush pressed against their promise, each word a fragile lifeline. In that suspended moment, the gorge held its breath. No thunder, no hoofbeat, only the murmur of wind through distant pines. Below, a lone silhouette paused at the gorge's mouth, a rider scanning the pass's dark mouth, unsure. The posse's torch glow flickered like anger suppressed. The scout called again, voice strained, but the canyon's hidden heights swallowed their cries. Elias and Tala turned, torchlight dancing on granite, and descended toward a future carved by stone and bound by blood. In the final hush, as painted gorge's spires stretched into night, their silhouettes melded, wounded man and orphaned girl, partners in flight, bearers of redemption and native pride. And as the canyon closed behind them, only the wind witnessed the oath sealed by river stone and shared resolve, a whisper promising dawn beyond these walls of solitude. A rumble shook painted gorge as dawn bled the sky, tremors coursing through limestone walls like a buried heartbeat awakened. Elias Kane steadied himself against the spire, Colt drawn and revolver's grip cold in his palm. Somewhere above, Tala Vance perched on a ledge shone with shale, eyes fixed on the narrow pass's mouth. Below, Samuel Dunn crouched behind a jagged rock, rifle at the ready. The posse's torches bobbed in the distance. 5 hard shapes creeping toward the trap that Tala had set at dawn's first light. With a silent nod, Tala pressed her foot against a loose boulder, teeth clenched in grim resolve. She'd studied this gorge's every fracture, every shadowed hollow, until she knew the exact rock that could send the mountain's teeth tumbling down the pass. Elias watched as the boulder shifted, then toppled with a muted roar that rolled like thunder through the chasm. A cascade of stones spilled down, smashing into the posse's path in a spray of dust and pebbles. Horses reared, hoofs scrabbling on sliding rock, and the riders stumbled, rifles clattering from startled grips. Elias fired once into loose rock to send a message. "Fall back," he shouted. His voice echoed across the canyon, mingling with the posse's shouts of alarm. Samuel rose from his cover, waving his rifle overhead. The posse scrambled in disarray, retreating beneath the rock slide's cloud of grit and their own bruised pride. No life spilled in those moments, only dust and the sound of broken earth. But victory wore its own cost. Elias staggered as blood seeped through his white shirt. The slug wound his side, burning with each rapid breath. Tala slid down the ledge in a controlled descent, landing beside him. Samuel limped forward to help, rifle forgotten. "You're hit worse than before," Samuel muttered, tugging at Elias's duster. Elias forced a wry grin. "Worth it," he rasped, "if it means she's free." He slipped into Samuel's arm for support. Tala pressed a clean kerchief, Samuel's bandana, against Elias's side. Her calm touch belied the turmoil in her chest. She laid a hand on the river stone tucked in her pocket, a silent call to the pact sealed by blood and hope. The canyon's hush wrapped around them, each moment a fragile pause before they fled deeper into safety. Samuel guided Elias along a hidden footpath Tala had revealed. Narrow terraces etched into the gorge wall, overgrown with scrub and laced with creeping vines. Among the vines lay a small cavern softly lit by an underground stream shimmer, the refuge Tala's people once called Warm Spring Hollow. Inside, water dripped in gentle arcs and stone benches cradled those weary enough to trust its shelter. Tala set Elias on one bench. Samuel closed his coat around him, and she knelt to soothe his pain with whispered Apache prayers. Elias closed his eyes against the ache, the cavern's damp air cool against sweat. The river stone pressed to his palm beneath the cloth, a reminder that fear had been overcome by resolve. Tala watched the drop of water tumble from the cave's lip into green glass below. "We're safe," she murmured in English, voice husky. "For now." Her arms trembled with relief, and she pressed her forehead to the stone wall, the echoes of her mother's lullaby coursing through the hollow. Hours passed in silent vigil as Samuel tended a small fire of deadwood. Sparks danced on the cave ceiling like fireflies, and the singed aroma mingled with moss and mineral scent. Elias leaned on a stone bench, hand over his wound, and watched Tala's profile in the firelight. Strong jaw set in determination, eyes soft with empathy. He reached into his vest and drew out the river stone, its surface dulled by salt and sorrow. He placed it carefully at the cave's mouth, where moss had claimed a shallow hollow. "Your thread ends here," he said softly, "and our future begins." Tala nodded, tears bright on her cheeks as she covered the stone with pebble after pebble, burying past grief to nourish tomorrow's roots. Outside, painted gorge side in night's deep hush, the posse, battered and bruised, had abandoned pursuit, their shouts gone with the mountain's rolling dust. Silence reigned once more, broken only by the drip of water and the rough, ragged breaths of those who sought refuge in Warm Spring Hollow. Months later, as summer ripened into autumn, Dry Mesa's neighbors began to whisper of a hidden settlement at the gorge's mouth, a cluster of adobe huts ringed by gardens of mesquite and agave. Elias and Tala, with Samuel's help, guided weary travelers and the dispossessed into this sanctuary. Word spread across the plains. Here women and children sculpted new lives, men tended fields once barred by prejudice, and elders shared stories of old peace treaties under the high red cliffs. 10 years passed like drifting clouds over Painted Gorge. Under a golden dawn, Elias Kane strode along a sun-baked path where cacti bloomed in riotous clusters. He paused by a deep spring, once Tala's secret counsel, with water cool at his palm. He closed his eyes, savoring the hush of dawn's first light. Tala Vance emerged from a stone cottage, her hair woven with gray strands of wisdom, smiling as she guided Levi Morales, now a sturdy youth, toward Elias's side. Samuel Dunn, his face lined yet bright, tended a mule laden with harvest, winter squash and crimson persimmons grown in fields that once lay fallow. They gathered by the spring's edge, a quiet family not born of blood, but of shared hardship and hope. Tala knelt to splash water on her face, lifting a salute to canyon walls that bore witness to her journey. Elias dipped his hand in the pool, the cool flow a reminder of the river stone's buried promise. Samuel spread a patchwork blanket beneath a juniper, and Tala joined him, passing a tin cup of tea brewed from chamiso and wild mint. Levi leaned on Elias's shoulder, eyes bright with tomorrow's promise. "We're safe," he murmured. Elias wrapped an arm around Tala's waist. More than safe, he said. We're free. They shared a look that needed no vows. Their partnership was etched deeper than any contract, carved in stone, sealed by sacrifice, and given shape by a river stone's simple magic. Behind them, neighbors tended gardens and repaired adobe walls. Each clap a hammer and drop a mortar a song of renewal. Painted gorge thrummed with new life, a refuge both cradle and fortress. In the golden haze of 1890 summer, the canyon's walls held not whispers of vengeance, but echoes of laughter, lullabies sung in Spanish and Apache, and the steady heartbeat of community forged in the crucible of compassion. And as the sun climbed over warm cliffs, its light fell on a mosaic of adobe roofs, river stones beneath young saplings, and three figures standing together, rancher, survivor, and steadfast friend, proof that even in the harshest frontier, redemption and reconciliation could find root blossom and stand eternal against the desert's vast horizon.